I've got 1977 Chevy Blazer in here today. This is Eric's, and we're just doing a nice simple restoration, a nice daily driver. Got a little out of hand, but they always do. I'm going to take this opportunity to show you how to put all your sheet metal back on. I'm not going to lie to you, occasionally I forget too, so stay tuned, we'll find out. Now, going out of order a little bit on this one. Normally I like to finish my engine, get it all running, air conditioning, suspension, anything and everything you can think of, because it is a real drag leaning over your fenders, especially when they're newly painted, to do all that work. But I'm waiting on some parts and I don't want to wait anymore, and I want to show you guys how to put the trucks together. So let me get some shims and some tape and some miscellaneous other things, and I'll be right back and we'll get started, okay? So you're going to want to be prepared, of course. You want to make sure you have enough assembly bolts so you don't run off halfway through. Sometimes I'll use a combination of nice shiny bolts and the old assembly bolts depending on where I'm going. So make sure you have all of them. Get your ratchet. Make sure you have body shims and all that kind of stuff. Make sure you got tape. You're going to be using the tape anywhere you're worried about scratching. So in this case, that's going to be your rocker panel down here, maybe the back side of the door, anything you're worried about making contact. Another thing that I really like to do is I like to get this rubber right here. And this is just called edging. And what you can do is just put it on your door nice and easy like this, or your fenders or what have you. And so this way, when you're going to go ahead and install the door, fender, what have you, you don't have to worry about as much chipping the paint on the edge, which is a real common thing to happen when you're assembling these. Now, a lot of times guys will put on tape, but this rubber is a lot better way to do it. Now, when you're putting the doors on, I've already got this one on just because it was easier for me. A lot of guys, they paint the doors on. I don't, but a lot of people do. So if your door's already on, you don't have to worry about it. But if you painted your doors off the way I recommend to do it, how you want to assemble it to make sure you don't do any damage is you want to make sure that you have your edging on all the way around. And what we're going to be doing is, first we will make sure that the threads on the caged bolts, nuts, inside your pillar right here are not gummed up with any paint or primer or buildup. So we're going to make sure that we clean those up and they're all working well. We'll run a bolt through every single one and make sure we're not having any problems. Because once you get your door on here and you're balancing it up there, it seems to be a lot more difficult to get your bolts in. And if you didn't clean up those threads first, you're going to be wondering, is it just a bad lineup, or are the threads all filled in with primer and paint? So we got that nice and clean, and then what you're going to want to do is bolt your hinges onto your door. Okay, then once they're on there, all you'll need to do is simply put some rags on the bottom of your rocker panel, or maybe you get some cardboard about 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch, and you can just simply take the door and just simply put it right up on there. Just place it on there. It'll just sit right there, and then you can go ahead and get your bolts in here. Now there's two on the outside of this, and there's one on the inside that you got to get from the inside of the pillar here. I'm gonna leave that off for now. You got 3 down on the bottom. You got to be careful when you're doing these, because if you have an extension on there, you can see that this one here is not getting anywhere near your door, but your other one, if you were to not have any tape, if you weren't paying attention, you can chip your door there pretty easy. So you got to really watch out for that. Once I have my door on, sometimes they just plop right into place and you're done. Other times they'll take 2 or 3 hours each side. So I've had this door on and I've adjusted it a couple of times, and I found out that one of the things that happened somewhere in the past that we just didn't realize is that it got hit this way. There were minor little dings right here. And what happened was it just forced the door forward just a little bit, and we have too much of a gap going on right here. Now that's something you're probably not going to run into, but if you do, it's not that big of a deal. Your hinges right here, they'll adjust in and they'll adjust out in order to take care of this gap. Now I've got these all the way back and it's still too much of a gap. So what I'm going to need to do is put some shims in between the door and the hinge right here in order to fix that problem. That's going to take me a few minutes, so I'll be back in just a few minutes. All right, so I've got some shims in between the hinges and the door. It moved it back about 1/8 of an inch, and now it looks like we've got a pretty nice line here. So that's pretty typical for these trucks. Now this is a Blazer, but this process is going to be the same for a Blazer or any square body truck, because the cab and everything forward is the same. Now the doors, again, I said that you can move them backwards and forwards by these bolts right here. The bolts that you got going right here and here, they're going to allow our door to move in and out. So what we need to do is when we have it on here, we want to hold it up against the edge, and we want to see, is this sticking out or is it sticking in? If we take this and we move it out, it'll take this and move it in, and vice versa. So right now we can just lightly see that that looks pretty damn good. I think maybe that, actually this whole door looks pretty good. Well, that just goes to the adage of, sometimes you put them on and poof, they're just there. So I'm just going to let this be for now. Now I also want to mention that I don't have the striker on the door. I don't have the rubber on the door. You don't want to have any of that in there because it'll lock the door into a certain position. And we want to be able to maintain the position we want, not what the mechanics wants. So we make sure we have this set first. We don't have anything restricting us. Now that we've got the door where we want it, we can go ahead and start on the front fender. So I'm going to go get one and I'll be right back. Now, I probably ought to explain why we're going to so much trouble on the door in the first place, and that's because your cab is locked into place, as it were. You're not going to be able to move any of these lines, but you'll be able to move all the lines on the door, and then all those lines are going to go from your door on out. So you have to make sure your door's in the right position first before you get everything else on. Now occasionally you might find out that you just don't have it in the right spot. You might have to pull that front fender off and realign your door because you cannot get to these bolts any other way without that fender being on there. So let's see how lucky we get, huh? If our cab isn't square on our frame, if it's not centered on the frame, nothing in the front's going to be centered either. So we're going to have to do a lot of different measurements to make sure that it is. Triangulated measurements are generally your best way to go. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the radiator core support, and I'm measuring it to this hole right here, and I've got 69.5. I'll come to the other side right here and we'll do the same thing. And in this instance, we've got 70 inches, so we know we're off a little bit there. But you could have different things that would cause that. Accidents in the past, manufacturing idiosyncrasies a lot of times. So we'll have to take additional measurements to see if we're square or not. Different places you can measure is from your frame right here to the bracket where the fender bolts on. In this case, I've got about 16.5 inches. I come to my other side. I'm just taking a lot of different measurements from a lot of different places because, like for instance, this right here where the fender bolts on, it's really easy for this to move around, but the rocker panel here, not so much. Now I did the rocker panel on the other side, so sometimes that can throw things off a little bit, but actually that's looking good. So from side to side here in the front, we're looking good. But when I measure in the back, I'm not. I'm about 16.5 inches on this side, 16.25 inches on this side, 16.75 of an inch on the other side. So our back end's over like this. So I think all we're going to need to do is just loosen up our bolts a little bit, and then we'll just shove it on over, and then that should line us up in the front too. Let's find out. So I'm going to go ahead and shove the cab over. Now I'm not shoving it this way. The way we have our measurements and everything, it's suggesting that what we've got is something like this. So if I shove that other side over there, the right side over, then it should do this. Now when you shove something, I'm just going to show you on this side because I don't have a camera over there. Don't do it in any flat open areas. You're going to want to do it where there's the most support. So we've got a good support here where the tailgate bolts up and everything. This is a good place to shove it. So you guys just stay right there. I'm going to go to the other side and shove it over. You tell me if you see anything. All right, so that's looking good. I got 16.5 on both sides in the back. Now I can double check my front right here. Got 69 3/4 there, which is good because we had 70 before and we had 69.5 over here. So that should be just the right measurements. Let's double check and see. Right, 69 3/4. So now we're nice and square. Now we can go ahead and tighten up all of our bolts on our cab, and then we can start moving forward. Now before you put your front fender on, you're going to need to get your radiator core support on. This is a brand new painted truck. It's got brand new bushings on the cab, so we're going to need brand new bushings for our radiator core support also. Now let's say for instance you took apart your truck and you got old bushings in your cab still and you didn't replace them with new ones. Then make sure you use your old ones, because what happens is these things get smashed down over the years, and if you had smashed down bushings on your cab and then you put brand new bushings there, it's going to make your fenders want to tilt up, and it's going to really mess up your lines between the door and the fender. So if you have old, put on old. If you got new, put on new. So we've got these guys on, and we're going to go ahead and put the radiator core support on up in here. And when you're putting these on, do not torque them down all the way. You want to be able to have it so the core support isn't flopping around on you. It needs to stay up straight, but we're still going to need to move it sideways, front and back and such to get our lineup done. So I'll get all this on here, and then I'll actually throw the front fender on. Now, I made sure that all of my threads are clean here on the cab. You've got one down here, and you've got one down here that hold on to the inner fender, and then there's one on the lower of the fender that we make sure that's clean too. I've got all my bolts sit here and waiting. I've got one right here for the front end, so now we can go ahead and put it on. Before we put it on, we are going to get our edging here, and we're going to put it on the fender, and I'm going to put it on the door here too, so that I can be sure that we don't get any damage, anything. All right, so this is just loosely bolted in, of course, so we can keep everything moving. Next, I'll go ahead and finally put my fender on, but we're going to get little slip nuts. I'll show you what those look like in just a second, and I'll put those in, and then we'll go ahead and put the fender on. This right here is a slip nut, so-called, because it just slips right on. There's about 7 of them on the fender here, and you have to make sure that you put them on the right way. The bolt's going to be going through like this, so that's how you're going to slide it on. Not like that, okay? I'll get all these on, and then I swear we're going to put this fender on. Now you want to get all of your bolts ready before you get your fender up here. You don't want to get up here and then figure out you're missing a bolt. So have everybody all set up, and now we can get our fender on. When I'm putting the fender on, I'm going to have somebody on the front making sure that the core support isn't hitting anything, and I'll be on the back here making sure we don't do any damage back here. So now, one thing I do want to note is that it's got this extra piece right here. You got to make sure that tucks behind the door and doesn't whack it. Okay, bring your nose down. Okay. All right, coming in nice and easy. Okay, put your nose down. Oops, I see what's going on. Okay, there we go. All right. So get a bolt started on the top first, because when the bolt's in the top, then it's just going to hang there. Don't have to worry about it falling or anything. and we'll get some bolts started in the front. Now to get to this bolt right here, we need to get this bottom one on first. All right, so now back to this bolt right here. You have to be careful with it, and also opening your door the first time. It's really easy to chip your paint. You can see the fender's really out right now. I need to kind of like tuck it in some and make sure we don't have a problem. Get my rubber back on. Because opening and closing the door when you're doing this is your most common way to chip your paint right here. So being real careful. Everybody's really nice, good. Okay, so obviously you could do damage when you're doing this. So we still have our edging on here to protect everything. And we've got tape on our extension also, just as a little extra benefit. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna tighten this bolt all the way up. I'm not tightening it super tight, I just want it all the way up against the cab. Again, carefully we're shutting our door to make sure we don't do any damage. I'm going to do the same thing with a bolt down here on the bottom. And once I get this in, then I can see how many shims I may or may not need to put on the doors. Okay. So let's take a look at this line here, see what we got. All right, so we can see here we're a little bit tight. Down here we're a little bit wide, so that means our fender's just up a little bit high, and that's because all these cab mounts are already tightened, but our radiator core support isn't tightened all the way because we still need it a little bit loose. So we'll have to work with that a little bit. Right here we can see that the fender isn't quite lining up. It's tucked in a little bit too far. So what you do is you get a shim and you simply put the shim up against the fender nice and gentle like and line it up against the door. So we can see that if we do that with this 1/8 inch shim, that the shim is sticking out too far. So we know this is too fat. So we'll get us a nice skinny shim. And we'll put it up there and do the same thing. And that's looking a little bit nicer. So I think I'm just going to go with 2 thin shims up here on the top, and then I'll go down to the bottom and do the same thing. All right, you see this right here? You got your shim, you got a little piece of tape. The reason I'm doing that is because it's really hard to hold onto the shim when it's behind this bracket here. So put the tape on there just a little bit. Now I can hold it back there nice and easy. When I'm tightening this down, I don't have to worry about it moving on me. And then I can just pull the tape off and it's not, remnants aren't stuck on there. Your helpful handy hint for the day. Down on the bottom, we're doing the same thing. Here I do have an 1/8 inch shim, and it looks like the 1/8 inch shim is going to be the right width for that. So I'll get this in the bottom, and I'm not getting it totally finalized right now. I'm getting it really straight, but after we put everything else on, we might have to manipulate it a little bit more, so just expect that. So one of the things we got to make sure is that our door is nice and even right here. If it's tucked in too far, then it's going to take this and come out, and it'll give us an erroneous line right there. How we're going to have this be straight is, now again, we don't have the rubber in it, and we don't have the latch on it because we want to be able to manipulate everything, move it around. But I need this to be stationary for right now. So what I'm going to do is just take a rag down here on the bottom, put it on the rocker panel, and that'll keep it from moving in too far. And I'll also get tape and put it on the door to help keep it nice and straight. Now you could put the latch in there, you know, but don't put the rubber on. The problem with putting the latch on is that if you put the latch on and it's not in the right spot, it'll encourage the door to tilt up or tilt down. So I like to wait until I've got everybody right, and then I put that on at last. So now I'm looking good there. Let's double check this right here. And so now with that done like that, you can see this lines up better, and I definitely don't need an 1/8 of an inch shim. I'm not sure I need a shim at all. Maybe just a baby. All right, I'm gonna get a baby shim on that. So when I have a shim in the top here and I've got a shim in the bottom, now I can work on this line right here. So I can just loosen up the bolts just a little bit, and then I'm gonna need to take my front fender and bring it down just a hair. That'll give me a little bit wider gap here, and it'll close my gap in here. If it's too radical, then you got to look at your radiator core support. Do you have too many bushings in there or shims? Is it just too fat, or do you not have enough? If you didn't have enough, you'd have a skinny line down here and you'd have a fat line here, because the fender would be doing that. So give me a few minutes for that and I'll be right back. Our line here and our line here and the lines here are all looking good. So this fender's done. Now I've tightened these two bolts that are right here. I've tightened the bolt on the bottom. I have not tightened the bolts on the inner fender or the radiator core support, because I'm still probably gonna have to move some things around. Now that we got this on, let's get our other fender on, huh? Next, I'm going to put on this piece right here. Now, really, I probably coulda, woulda, shoulda put it on before, but it's not that big of a deal either or, really. This is just going to slide up in here and like that. So you can see it's not that big of a deal. Maybe loosen up your front fenders and spread them out a little bit. So this will go on next. Then we've got a few pieces that'll be going on here and across the bottom. So that's one of the reasons we left all of these bolts loose and the bolts on the inner fender, so we could move these in and out to get those few pieces on. And we're going to leave the fenders out, because when we put the hood on, we got to really be careful that we don't hit the fender. So we'll be leaving them expanded and hoping for the best. All right, next we'll go ahead and put this in. This is actually two different pieces right here. So this will go underneath that like that. This will go right in here like this, and then we can go ahead and bolt everybody up. Next, I'm going to put my lower valance on here. And really, I probably ought to tape this up and everything, but me and Edgar are pretty good, so we're not going to do that. But you might want to do that. I'll even sometimes, if I'm doing a higher end job, put tapes on both sides of everything. This is just a nice, decent daily driver we're doing, and I'm not really worried about scratching anything today. So again, our fenders are still out a little bit and nothing's tightened up. That's what makes this putting this in easier. Now we can go ahead and put our hood hinges on. And what I want you to notice is that this is slotted right here and this is slotted right here. So normally when I put these on, I'm going to take it and I'm going to have it so that the hood hinge is all the way up in my slots, because once it's assembled, bolted on, it'll be easier to move the hinge down if I need to make adjustments than it is to move up. Now it's not that big of a deal if you don't do it. These are just helpful, handy hints. All right, we're getting ready to put the hood on, but you really got to prepare when you're putting the hood on. It's big and heavy and it can do a lot of damage quick. So we've got wrenches set up on both sides. We got all of our bolts set up on both sides. We got the carpet right here. We got tape on right here. Maybe I'll put tape on the hood even. When we're putting it on, we're going to come at it horizontal. We'll come up, we'll get it up on here. One person will get the back started first. After this bolt is in, then the other person will get their back one in first. Now you have to put the back one in first. If you were to put this in first and then the hood fell forward, it's going to bend this bracket and everything's going to get messed up. But if you have it bolted in the back, it's just going to sit there nice and firm while you do the rest of your work. So get prepped up, then get your hood. All right. Yep, coming back a hair more. Okay, right there. Okay, you got the front?
Yeah, I got it. down or up there.
Okay.
That good?
You want the highest or the lowest point?
Actually, yeah, you generally want to bring it all the way up, and then, but I wouldn't get it too tight because you got to get the front one. Now, these are slotted, so when we are going to be tightening up the hood, and we're not tightening it totally, we're just getting it a little bit snug because we're still going to have to move it around, but these are slotted, so we're going to bring the slot all the way forward, then we'll go ahead and shut the hood and we can tap it back into the right spot. But you got to leave it a little bit loose so you can move when you tap. All right, keep in mind that all the bolts up here are loose. So what we're going to be doing before we bring our hood down is just double checking our gap in between using a triangulated going on again. Right now I got about 82.5 right to here, and I had 82.5 on the other side. So we should be all good to go. Now when we bring the hood down, we got to be careful. Somebody's got to get on that side over there, and they have to watch and see if the hood's going to hit the fender or not. So we're coming on down. And also, another thing real quick, these hoods are really, really problematic for bending right in here. There's a odd little idiosyncrasy they had in the hood. So when your hood hinges are all painted and they're all brand new and stuff, and the paint gets on there and sticks together, it might freeze them into spot. So if you grab it at the top right here and pull it down, you could bend the hood right here. So what you got to remember to do on these is push them back. Okay, and when you push it back like that, you see that it moved, and now we can bring this down a little bit easier. It's still a bit stiff from all the paint, but when we're coming down, we're watching our seams right here and making sure that we're not hitting. So it's looking pretty good so far. Let's keep coming down. Okay, easy now. Now another thing I want to make note of is that I don't have the center pin in the latch right here. Okay. So we don't have the pin in here, because if we had that in there at this particular point in time, it would move the hood over to wherever the latch wanted it. So we'll leave that off. I'll put this on just because it's not going to interfere with us. So we'll have this down, and now we can see how we're lining up. To the front, that's looking pretty good. This one here we can see is back, so this side here's got to come forward a little bit. We can see that this back right here is almost in the right spot, but see that side over there, it's like really high. All right, so remember I told you how the hood hinges has a slot in it, and you can go ahead and move the hood hinge like this. So what happened was that they weren't tight enough, and when we shut it, the hood hinge just simply moved down. So what we did is we loosened them up, we moved the hood hinge up, and then we tightened them up. Now I know that sounds counterintuitive. You would think that if I wanted to bring this down, I'd bring the hood hinge down. But actually you don't. You bring it up. It's just an odd thing. I don't know what. Watch. Okay, push in. Okay. So here you can see we're evening out a little bit. Looks like I got to take it down just a little bit more. Also, these old hood hinges, when the joints get a little bit tired and stuff, they will poke up just a little bit. I didn't get new hood hinges, but they do have them. Heck, I got new fenders, new hoods, everything. I could have built this brand new with no original parts if I wanted to these days. So looking pretty good. A little bit too tight right here. We got a giant gap going on right here, so that means that this looks like it's a little bit too far forward, shoving it over that way, and it looks like that side could come up just a hair. So you'll have to adjust this thing a bunch of times, and if you adjust it a bunch of times and it's still not lining up on you, double check your front fenders and make sure that they're right first. Take a bunch of different measurements just like you did with your cab and make sure everything's copacetic. So give me a little bit of time to, manipulate this a little bit more, and let's see how close we can get it, huh? So keep in mind everything's loose up in here. So you see this gap right here? Now you don't have that gap. Now you got a big gap. So we got our hood nice and straight. Now we can go ahead and tighten up all these bolts that are on the core support and bring the fenders in. Once they're tightened and brought in as far as possible, then we can go ahead and shove the fenders over so we get these gaps nice and even. Okay, so the hood's looking pretty nice. Now, one of the things that I did was I loosened up both bolts on both sides, brought the hood all the way forward, and then I can just gently tap it back until it's nice and even on both sides. Then you'll open up the hood just enough to be able to get your hands on the bolts, so only about that far. Then I can go ahead and tighten the front. I don't have to worry about it moving. I can open it up the rest of the way, and I can tighten my bolts in the back. So my fenders are tight to my radiator core support. My hood is looking really good, and my gaps are looking really good here. I've got my radiator core support right in the right spot. Now I can go ahead and tighten it up, and I'm kind of done. But when you do this, then a lot of times you'll notice, oh, that's just a little bit off there, or that's just a little bit off there. So you might have to go back to the door or the fender and add a shim or take a shim out. But that's all to be expected. So just take your time. You start getting frustrated, just sit down, have a beer, chill out, and come back to it. You don't want to chip up your paint. You don't want to do any damage. You don't want to have to do any repairs to. My name's David Welch. I'm at Brothers Tech Center every single Tuesday, bolting things together so you can see how they go back together. You make sure you check us out on Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, and subscribe, because man, we're cool.